Welcome back to AgriTalk from Washington, D.C. We are very happy to be part of a group here with Iowa and Missouri Farm Bureau. We have the two presidents with us, Craig Lang from Iowa, Blake Hurst from Missouri. And I want to just ask both of them, as they're out here with their members, to talk with members of Congress about these issues, many of which we have already talked about here on the program today. But Craig, I'll start with you. What are the top issues that you bring from Iowa here to Washington, D.C. that your members want to talk about that they're most concerned about?
Well, certainly, Mike, the issues that are most important to us, you've already talked about in the program today, the federal deficit. One of the things that wasn't mentioned during the deficit is that we run this deficit for the next 10 years, and we had $600 to $800 billion each year. It becomes more difficult to pay off. So even if we balance the budget, it doesn't mean that we won't have another 20 years after that our kids and grandkids have to pay for that. So that's the first issue. The water issue is huge for us, like Missouri, with the Missouri River and Missouri Rivers on the western side of Iowa and the Mississippi River. Those issues are huge concern to us, and the one that we haven't spent a whole lot of time on is ambient standards. The particulate matter 10 is an issue that for anyone that crop farms, anyone that has livestock farms, we're concerned about regulations forced on us in the state, and we want to talk about those issues.
Blake, from the Missouri perspective?
Yeah, I think we would kind of repeat what Craig said. I think the top issue as we come here is talking about clean water permitting, pesticide permitting. We think that FIFRA does a good job of regulating how farmers apply pesticides, so we hope that it will be made clear that a clean water permit is not needed for farmers to go about the day-to-day business of their farms. Of course, the second thing would be the budget. We've had this morning, and several speakers talk about the problems we face in Missouri Farm Bureau, and our farmers are extremely concerned about our deficits. And finally, the trade bills are various trade agreements. We'd like to see them approved. We're losing close to $1 billion of markets from the lack of approval for these three trade bills. That's extremely important for our farmers, and so we hope that action will be taken on them very soon.
I find it very frustrating, Craig, when you hear people say how concerned they are about how we're going to feed the people of the world, but at the same time, a lot of those same people will take steps or promote, push steps that would keep farmers from being able to produce the food that would feed all the people of the world.
Well, that's certainly correct. What Blake talked about, the FTAs, that's very important on the trade issues for us to be able to push our ag products into those countries. After all, if you look Colombia and Panama, they've had freedom to trade whatever they wanted into the U.S. with very little restrictions for many, many years, and we've lost our ability to supply them with what we believe is a superior, lower cost crop into their country. So freedom of trade is one of those. But as you look at consumers in general, I don't think they understand the innovation and the advancement of agriculture and our ability to provide them with food at the lowest cost of anywhere in the world and continue to do that. But the continuation of regulations and burdens from Washington and state levels make us uncompetitive, and that's why we're here, for our members to tell that to those people that we elected and say it's time for you to look at the regulations that we have. If you want us to continue to supply food for the world, then you have to help us get there.
And Blake, that doesn't mean agriculture is not for clean water, clean air. Certainly we are, but there has to be some common sense here that allows for farmers to be able to produce.
Yeah, because as Craig said, we are in a very tight worldwide supply situation. And when you see what's happening in the Middle East with the demonstrations on the streets, there's a great hunger for democracy, but there's also a great hunger. And if we aren't allowed to produce the way we know we can, being environmentally responsible, but also producing with the latest technologies as efficient as we can, that hunger is going to spread throughout the world, and it's going to cause more political unrest. I mean, it's almost like there's a huge disconnect in people's minds between how many people are hungry, how many people need what we produce, and our government, who tends to try to slow down our ability to meet that need.
Craig, let's talk about also, we have high commodity prices, and we're happy to see the value really of all of our commodities starting to come up. Beef prices coming up, pork prices coming up, even dairy prices to some extent. Finally, yeah. But we also know input costs are going up too. So there's always that concern. We've seen it happen in just the last couple of years. If those commodity prices drop at all, they always tend to drop faster and more than the input costs do, that can lead to a very serious situation.
Yeah, and I think that's why it was important for the American Farm Bureau delegates in Atlanta this year to recognize the value of a safety net, is because even though our prices are high, our input prices are high, if the land prices start to back up, if our commodity prices start to go down with high input costs driven by oil, we need some kind of safety net so we can preserve the equity in the farm. It's never about providing income through management that's not superior, but what it's more about is that we don't want to be in a position in this country where we have to import food like we do energy. So let's keep our farmers in a position where they have a safety net that provides some kind of safety towards equity in that farming operation, and that's one of the few things that we did agree on as voting delegates at Atlanta at the American Farm Bureau Convention.
Like, that can be something difficult to explain to urban residents and non-farm people. We know even the press, especially out here on the East Coast, a lot of times will bring this up. Why should farmers get any kind of support? That's a question that's often asked. How do we answer them?
Well, I think we start off by pointing out simple, basic things to us. But the first thing we say is we talk about what percentage of the Farm Bill spending goes to nutrition programs, extremely important programs, but not necessarily programs that benefit farmers, if only indirectly. And the second thing we point out is how small a percentage of the federal budget goes to farm program, goes to the commodity programs that equate with the farm program. And then we talk about how important it is to our farmers, how those programs are, how we weather those years when we have low yields, those years when we have low prices, how that is a safety net that allows us to have a sustainable and a dependable food supply.
Greg, that's a big challenge we have to explain this to the people of this country and around the world, what it takes to produce a crop and the food and where it comes from even. And a lot of that disconnect, we're really paying a price for that disconnect as far as public perception and image for agriculture, and that's what we're trying to explain to people.
Well, we're working very hard to improve our perception to the consumer. There's a disconnect between the cost of a gallon of milk and that farmer that actually creates the milk, the dairyman. The same thing is true, a box of cornflakes versus a farmer that's a corn farmer. There's a disconnect there, so we need to work very hard to make sure that the consumer understands that only about 20% of that dollar actually goes back to the farmer. The rest is marketing, it's packaging, it's transportation, much of that driven by oil. And so we just have to work hard to make sure the consumer understands that. And when we do that, I think we're coming together as farm groups, the U.S. Farm Alliance, those kind of things. We want to make sure the consumer understands that it's not gouging. What we're trying to do is create an environment which has opportunity, not just for us as farmers, but young farmers, so that the security of food takes place in this decade, the next decade, and into the future.
Our thanks to Craig Lang, Iowa Farm Bureau President, and Blake Hurst, Missouri Farm Bureau President. Let's give them a big round of applause here. And our thanks to you for joining us on our broadcast this week from Washington, D.C. Tomorrow, we will be at the Canadian Embassy. We will have a chance to talk about some issues concerning our neighbor to the north, their concerns and objections to our country of origin labeling. We'll also talk about the whole situation with the BSE concerns that are still out there, and, of course, budget issues as well. So all that coming up tomorrow. Hope you'll join us. From Washington, D.C., this is AgriTalk.